Chapter 1, The Weight of Ordinary Days. The morning Daniel Kovac received the letter, snow was falling over Millbrook in thick, wet clumps that clung to the windowpanes of his kitchen like desperate fingers. He stood at the counter, coffee growing cold in his hand, watching his daughter Emma trace patterns in the frost with one small fingertip. She was 7 years old that winter, still young enough to find magic in frozen glass, still unburdened by the knowledge of what her grandfather had carried to his grave 3 months earlier. "Daddy, look," she said, her breath fogging the window. "It's like stars." Daniel smiled, though the expression felt heavy on his face. Everything felt heavy these days. The house, inherited from his father along with a mortgage that had somehow never been mentioned, pressed down on him with the weight of every creaking floorboard and settling beam. His father's silence pressed down harder still. "Beautiful, sweetheart," he said, setting down his mug. "Go get your boots on. Bus'll be here soon." Emma skipped away, her footsteps light and uncomplicated, and Daniel turned back to the small pile of mail he'd been sorting through. Bills, mostly. A flyer for a pizza place that had closed 2 years ago. The mailing lists in Millbrook were always a few years behind reality, as if the town itself existed in a slower stream of time. And then, beneath a water bill he couldn't quite afford, an envelope that made him pause. It was cream-colored, official-looking, with a return address that meant nothing to him: Clearwater and Associates, Legal Services, Hartford, Connecticut. His name and address were printed, not handwritten, in a font that suggested efficiency and distance. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the quality of the paper, the weight of whatever was inside. The kettle whistled. Emma was singing something in the hallway, a song from school about rabbits and rain. Outside, the snow continued its silent accumulation, burying the brown grass of November, covering the flower beds his mother had tended before the cancer took her, 12 years gone now. Daniel's father had never replanted them. Had never replaced much of anything, Daniel realized. Just let it all slowly decline, held together with duct tape and silence and a stubbornness that Daniel had mistaken for strength. He opened the envelope. The letter was brief, professionally worded, and completely incomprehensible. It referenced case numbers and dates from the 1970s, mentioned his father's full name, Victor Kovac, and something about compensation eligibility pending document review and verification of residency during the period of 1972 to 1979. There was a phone number, an email address, and a request that he contact them at his earliest convenience to discuss matters related to Settlement Agreement CV 47A regarding environmental exposure and related health outcomes. Environmental exposure. Health outcomes. Daniel read it 3 times, standing in his kitchen while his daughter zipped her coat and called for him to help with her backpack, while the school bus rumbled closer through the wet snow. The words made sense individually but refused to cohere into meaning. His father had been a machinist, had worked at the Millbrook Industrial Park for 37 years before retiring on a pension that barely covered his property taxes. He died of a heart attack in his sleep, peacefully, the doctor said. A mercy, everyone said. After the long decline, after the confusion and the tremors and the slow erasure of the man Daniel had known, it was a mercy. "Daddy. Coming, Em." He folded the letter, slipped it into his shirt pocket, and went to help his daughter into her backpack, kissing the top of her head where her hair smelled like the strawberry shampoo her mother had bought before she left. Before she'd decided that Millbrook was suffocating her, that Daniel's sadness over his father's decline was suffocating her, that all of it was too much and she needed to find herself somewhere else, with someone else. The divorce papers had arrived 4 months ago. Emma still asked when Mommy was coming home. At the door, watching Emma trudge through the snow toward the waiting bus, Daniel touched the letter in his pocket. He thought about his father's hands, the tremor that had started so subtly he dismissed it as age. The way Victor had forgotten his own address, his wife's name, had looked at Daniel sometimes with eyes that held no recognition at all. Early onset dementia, the doctors had said. Genetic, probably. Nothing to be done. Nothing to be done. The bus pulled away, Emma's face a small pale oval in the window, her hand raised in a wave. Daniel waved back, standing in the doorway until the red taillights disappeared into the white morning, until the cold made his fingers ache. Inside, he called the number on the letter. It rang 4 times before a woman answered, her voice smooth and practiced, professionally sympathetic. Clearwater and Associates, this is Jennifer. How may I direct your call? I received a letter, Daniel said. About my father. Victor Kovac. A pause, the sound of typing. Yes, Mr. Kovac. Thank you for calling. Let me transfer you to Mr. Clearwater. He's been handling the Millbrook cases personally. The hold music was classical, something vaguely Mozart. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, his father's table, scarred with decades of family meals and homework sessions and his mother's habit of working crossword puzzles in pen. He traced one of the deeper gouges with his thumbnail, remembering nothing about how it got there. Mr. Kovac? A man's voice, deeper, older, with an edge of weariness that the receptionists hadn't carried. Thank you for getting back to us so promptly. I'm Robert Clearwater. I'm very sorry about your father. Thank you, Daniel said automatically. I don't understand the letter. What's this about? Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Kovac, are you aware of the nature of the facility where your father worked? The specific operations at the Millbrook Industrial Park during the 1970s? He was a machinist. Made parts for? I don't know, manufacturing equipment. He never talked much about work. No, Clearwater said quietly. I imagine he didn't. The facility manufactured components for military applications, Mr. Kovac. Specifically, they handled materials that we now know to be extremely hazardous. Trichloroethylene, primarily, along with several other industrial solvents. The workers were exposed daily, without proper protection, without being informed of the risks. The groundwater contamination extended into the residential areas. Your father's neighborhood. Where you grew up. The kitchen felt very cold suddenly. Through the window, snow continued to fall, peaceful and white and clean. For more than 30 years, the government knew, Clearwater continued. They had studies. Reports. They knew what those chemicals did to human tissue, to neurological systems. They sealed the files and let those people keep working, keep living on that poisoned ground, keep drinking that water. Your father's illness, the dementia, the tremors, the personality changes, they're consistent with long-term TCE exposure. Very consistent. Daniel's hand holding the phone had gone numb. There's a settlement, Clearwater said. It won't undo anything. But there's compensation available for families like yours. If you're willing to pursue it, if you're willing to have your father's medical records reviewed, to testify if needed. The files were sealed, Mr. Kovac, but we're opening them. Finally. Through the window, a cardinal landed on the snow-covered fence, impossibly red against all that white. Daniel watched it, this bright living thing in the dead of winter, and thought about his father's hands shaking over a cup of coffee, his father's voice asking who Daniel was, his father's eyes empty of everything that had made him a father at all. Mr. Kovac? Are you still there? Yes, Daniel said. I'm here. Tell me what I need to do. Outside, the cardinal sang once, sharp and clear, and flew away. Chapter 2, Excavation. The boxes came down from the attic on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after Daniel's first conversation with Robert Clearwater. Emma was at her mother's apartment in Hartford for the weekend, a new arrangement that left the house feeling cavernous and too quiet, and Daniel had been avoiding this task since the funeral. Now it could no longer wait. His father's life, reduced to cardboard and dust. The attic stairs groaned under his weight, protesting in the same key they had for 30 years. Daniel remembered sneaking up here as a child, searching for Christmas presents, finding instead his father's military service medals in a shoebox, never displayed, never mentioned. Even then, Victor Kovac had been a man who kept things buried. The air hung thick with trapped heat despite the January cold outside. Daniel pulled the string on the bare bulb, and yellow light spilled across stacked boxes, old furniture draped in sheets like sleeping ghosts, and the accumulated debris of a family that had slowly diminished from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. His mother's sewing machine. His own childhood bicycle, one wheel missing. And there, against the far wall, a stack of boxes labeled in his father's precise handwriting, work, 1970s, documents, Mill Park. Daniel pulled the first box toward him, the cardboard soft with age, and sat cross-legged on the dusty floor. Inside, he found pay stubs dating back to 1972, when his father had been 26 years old, newly married, newly employed at what the letterhead called Millbrook Defense Manufacturing Facility. The pay had been good, Daniel noticed. Better than most factory work. Good enough to buy the house where Daniel now sat, good enough to start a family. Beneath the pay stubs, he found photographs. His father, impossibly young, grinning in front of a concrete building with no windows, wearing coveralls and holding a lunch pail. His father with a group of other men, all of them laughing at something outside the frame, all of them strong and alive and unaware that their bodies were already beginning the slow process of betrayal. Daniel recognized some of the faces. Mr. Petrosky, who'd lived 3 houses down and died of liver cancer when Daniel was in high school. Tommy Chen's father, dead of a brain tumor before Tommy graduated college. Bill Morrison, who'd developed Parkinson's so severe he'd ended up in a nursing home, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't feed himself. The pattern had always been there. Daniel had just never looked for it. He found a newsletter, yellowed and brittle, dated August 1975. Mill Park Monthly it was called, full of cheerful updates about production quotas exceeded, safety records maintained, employee anniversaries celebrated. There was a photo of his father receiving a certificate for 3 years of service. In the background, Daniel could see large metal drums stenciled with warnings he couldn't quite read in the grainy image. His phone rang, breaking the attic's heavy silence. Clearwater's number. Mr. Kovac, I wanted to update you on what we've found, the lawyer said without preamble. We've obtained some of the initial documentation through FOIA requests. It's worse than we thought. Daniel closed his eyes, still holding the newsletter. The EPA conducted a study in 1976, Clearwater continued. They found TCE levels in the groundwater surrounding the facility at concentrations 40 times the safe limit. 40 times, Mr. Kovac. They documented it, reported it to the Department of Defense, and recommended immediate evacuation and remediation. But they didn't evacuate. No. The facility was deemed critical to national security. The recommendation was overruled at the federal level. The files were classified. The workers were never informed. The residents were never informed. Your father drank that water for 7 more years before the facility finally closed in 1983. By then, the damage was done. Daniel looked at the photograph of his father, young and grinning, holding his lunch pail. Had he packed sandwiches from home? Had he drunk the water from the facility fountains? Had he washed his hands in those sinks, splashed his face, brought the contamination home on his clothes for Daniel's mother to wash, for young Daniel to breathe in the steam from the dryer? How many? Daniel asked. How many people were exposed? We're still compiling the list. At least 400 workers over the facility's operational lifetime. Another 2,000 residents in the immediate area. The health outcomes are, Clearwater paused. There's a cluster of early-onset dementia cases 30 times higher than the national average. Neurological disorders. Cancers. Birth defects in children born to exposed parents. Birth defects. Daniel thought of Emma, bright and healthy and perfect. He thought of the 2 miscarriages between her birth and the divorce, the ones the doctors had said were just bad luck, just chromosomal abnormalities, nothing anyone could have prevented. He thought of his own headaches, increasingly frequent, the tremor in his left hand he'd been attributing to stress. Mr. Kovac. I know this is overwhelming. What do you need from me? Daniel's voice sounded distant to his own ears. Everything you can find. Medical records, employment documents, any correspondence your father might have kept. We're building a case that they knew, that they chose secrecy over safety. Your father's progression, documented over years, it's evidence. Your evidence, if you're willing. After the call ended, Daniel sat in the silence of the attic, surrounded by the archaeology of his father's life. He pulled out more papers, tax returns, insurance documents, a letter from the facility manager dated 1978 thanking Victor for his discretion and continued dedication during a period of transition. Discretion. As if silence was a virtue. As if keeping secrets for the people who were poisoning you was something to be thanked for. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a plastic bag, he found a journal. His father had never been a writer, had barely written more than his name on birthday cards, and yet here were pages filled with his tight, controlled handwriting. Daniel opened to a random page, dated April 1979. Headaches worse today. Morrison said his hands are shaking again. Chen's having trouble with his vision. We joked about getting old at 33. Thompson from B-Shift died last week. Heart attack, they said. He was 39. I watch Danny playing in the yard and wonder what we're bringing home on our boots. Danny. Daniel's childhood nickname, abandoned when he turned 12 and decided he was too old for it. He flipped forward, finding entries that grew shorter, more fragmented, as the years progressed. The last entry was from 1982, just months before the facility closed. Can't remember if I took my medication this morning. Lisa is worried. I'm worried. Something's not right. Something hasn't been right for a long time. But who do you tell? Who would listen? Daniel's hands were shaking as he closed the journal. His father had known. Had suspected. Had written it down and then sealed it away in an attic box, had carried the knowledge silently through his decline, through the erasure of his own mind, had died with the truth locked inside him. The cardinal sang outside, somewhere in the snow-heavy branches. Daniel gathered the boxes, every one of them, and began carrying them downstairs. If his father couldn't speak, then these papers would. If the files had been sealed, then Daniel would unseal them. The damage was done, yes, to his father, to hundreds of others, perhaps to Daniel himself, perhaps to Emma, but the silence could end. The silence would end. Chapter 3, The Architecture of Lies. The conference room in Hartford smelled of old coffee and recycled air. Daniel sat at a long table scattered with documents, facing Robert Clearwater and a woman who'd introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen, an epidemiologist specializing in environmental health. Through the window behind them, March rain streaked the glass, turning the city into a watercolor blur. I need you to understand what you're looking at, Dr. Chen said, sliding a folder across the table. Her hands were steady, but her eyes held something Daniel had learned to recognize in the past 2 months, the particular exhaustion of people who'd seen too much preventable suffering. Inside the folder were medical charts, graphs with ascending lines, lists of names. So many names. This is the epidemiological study the EPA conducted in 1976, she continued. The one that was classified and buried. We obtained it through the lawsuit. It took 9 months and 3 federal judges, but we have it now. Daniel scanned the pages, struggling to parse the technical language. Clearwater leaned forward, translating. They tested everyone within a 2-mile radius of the facility. Workers, residents, children. They found TCE in blood samples at levels that, Dr. Chen, help me explain this. Trichloroethylene is a neurotoxin, Dr. Chen said, her voice clinical but gentle. At the concentrations they found, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It accumulates in fatty tissue. The brain is largely fatty tissue, Mr. Kovac. Over time, it causes cellular death in specific regions, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, the areas responsible for memory, executive function, motor control. The areas that had failed in his father, one by one, like lights going out in a house. They knew this in 1976. Daniel asked. They knew this in 1969, Dr. Chen replied. There are internal memos from the Department of Defense discussing the risks. They weighed those risks against the strategic value of the facility's output and decided the mission was more important than the people. She pulled out another document, this one marked with red stamps, classified, top secret, eyes only. Someone had finally removed those classifications, had dragged this paper into the light. Daniel read the header, Memorandum Re, Health Risk Assessment, Millbrook Defense Manufacturing Facility, June 12, 1974. The language was bureaucratic, sanitized, but the meaning was clear. They'd known about the contamination. They'd known about the health risks. They'd conducted a cost-benefit analysis that valued the facility's continued operation at $47 million annually and estimated the long-term health costs to the exposed population at $12 million over 20 years. The recommendation had been to continue operations, implement minimal safety improvements that wouldn't disrupt production, and, Daniel's vision blurred as he read the final line, maintain information security to prevent unnecessary public alarm and potential litigation. Maintain information security. Don't tell the people you're poisoning that they're being poisoned. Your father, Clearwater said quietly, kept his own records. The journal you found, his medical history, they corroborate everything in these official documents. His symptom onset, his progression, it matches the EPA's predictions exactly. He was a textbook case, Mr. Kovac. And he wasn't alone. Dr. Chen opened her laptop, turned it toward Daniel. On the screen was a spreadsheet, color-coded, each row a person, each column a year. This is what we've compiled so far, she said. 463 workers. 1,847 residents in the contaminated zone. Of those, 214 have died. The causes: neurological disease, liver cancer, kidney failure, brain tumors, early onset dementia. The mortality rate is 4 times higher than the national average for their age cohort. Daniel's eyes moved down the list. He recognized names. His elementary school principal. His little league coach. The woman who'd worked at the library, who'd helped him find books about dinosaurs when he was 8. All dead. All poisoned. And the living, he asked. Dr. Chen's expression tightened. 309 documented cases of chronic illness. Parkinson's, ALS, cognitive impairment, peripheral neuropathy. Many of them are in nursing homes now, requiring full-time care. Many can't work. Can't live independently. Can't remember their children's names, Daniel added softly. No, she agreed. They can't. Clearwater pulled out another folder, this one thinner. We've also been tracking the second generation. Children born to exposed parents between 1970 and 1985. Daniel's throat constricted. The data is still preliminary, but we're seeing elevated rates of developmental disorders, learning disabilities, and, Clearwater hesitated. We're seeing a pattern of reproductive issues. Miscarriages, stillbirths, infertility. The room tilted slightly. Daniel gripped the edge of the table. How many miscarriages, he heard himself ask. Dr. Chen consulted her notes. In our sample population, 47% of women born to exposed parents have experienced at least one pregnancy loss, compared to the national average of 15 to 20%. Mr. Kovac, we'd like your permission to review your family's complete medical history. Your wife's, ex-wife's, pregnancy records. Your own health records. Emma's. Emma. 7 years old, perfect and bright and whole. But the miscarriages between her and the divorce, the 2 lost pregnancies that had been the beginning of the end of his marriage, had those been random chance? Or had his father's poisoning reached forward through time, through Daniel's blood, to touch the children he tried to create? There's something else, Clearwater said. He pulled out a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The Millbrook Gazette, dated September 1977. The headline read, "Local activist raises concerns about water quality." Daniel read the article. A woman named Margaret Weiss, a nurse who lived 2 blocks from the facility, had noticed a pattern of illness in her neighborhood. She'd gone to the town council, demanding water testing. She'd been dismissed as an alarmist. 3 months later, according to a follow-up article Clearwater provided, her house had burned down under suspicious circumstances. She'd moved away. No one had listened. They tried to tell someone, Daniel said. Several people tried, Dr. Chen replied. We have documentation of at least 6 formal complaints between 1974 and 1982. All were ignored or actively suppressed. 2 of the complainants lost their jobs at the facility. One was committed to a psychiatric hospital by his family after he became, quote, obsessed and paranoid about the water. The architecture of the lie was becoming visible now, the careful construction that had kept the truth buried for decades. It wasn't just negligence. It was active suppression. It was choosing profit and military priority over human lives, then building walls of silence around that choice, brick by bureaucratic brick. Daniel thought of his father's journal entry, "Who do you tell? Who would listen?" "I'll testify," he said. "Whatever you need. Medical records, depositions, testimony. I'll do it." Clearwater nodded slowly. "You should know that the government is fighting this aggressively. They're arguing national security, statute of limitations, sovereign immunity. They're claiming the workers assumed the risk, that the science wasn't clear at the time. They have very expensive lawyers, Mr. Kovac. And we have the truth," Daniel said. "Yes," Dr. Chen said quietly. "We have the truth." Finally. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, or trying to. Some stains, Daniel knew now, went too deep for any amount of water to reach. Chapter 4, The Reckoning. The federal courthouse in New Haven was built from gray stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Daniel climbed the steps on a cold morning in October, 9 months after opening his father's boxes, 7 months after agreeing to testify. Emma held his hand, though at 8 years old she insisted she was too big for hand-holding most days. Today was different. Today, she seemed to understand that her father needed the anchor. "Will there be a lot of people?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart." "Will they be mad?" Daniel looked down at his daughter, at the worry creasing her forehead. How did you explain to a child that anger could be righteous? That sometimes the world needed people to stand up and say the quiet parts loud, to drag secrets into daylight no matter how much it hurt? "Some of them might be," he said carefully. "But we're doing the right thing. Even when it's hard, we do what's right." Inside, the courtroom was already filling. Daniel recognized faces from the support group meetings Clearwater had organized, men and women whose parents had worked at the facility, whose lives had been shaped by invisible poison. There was Janet Morrison, whose father's Parkinson's had left him unable to speak for the last 5 years of his life. Kevin Petrosky, whose sister had been born with severe developmental disabilities in 1978. Maria Santos, who'd buried both her parents within 6 months of each other, both dead of brain cancer before they turned 60. And there, in the front rows reserved for government attorneys, sat a wall of dark suits and impassive faces. Daniel counted 8 lawyers on the defense side. They had folders stacked in neat piles, laptops open, the confident posture of people who'd never lost sleep over someone else's suffering. Clearwater touched Daniel's shoulder. "You're up second. After Dr. Chen establishes the medical causation. Remember what we practiced, stick to the facts, stay calm, tell your father's story. That's all you need to do." The judge entered, and the room rose. The Honorable Patricia Westmore was in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that suggested she'd heard every excuse, every evasion, and had developed no patience for either. Dr. Chen took the stand first. For 40 minutes, she walked the court through the science, TCE's neurological effects, the concentration levels found in Millbrook's water, the epidemiological data showing causation beyond any reasonable doubt. The government's lawyers objected repeatedly, trying to exclude evidence, to narrow the scope, to argue that correlation wasn't causation. Judge Westmore overruled them each time, her expression growing progressively stonier. Then it was Daniel's turn. The witness stand felt exposed, elevated, like standing on a stage with two bright lights. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and met Clearwater's eyes across the room. "Mr. Kovac, please tell the court about your father, Victor Kovac." Daniel's voice was steady as he began. He talked about his father's work at the facility, the pride Victor had taken in his job, the good pay that had let him buy a house and raise a family. He described the changes that had started in his father's early 50s, the forgetfulness, the confusion, the tremors. "He forgot my mother's name," Daniel said. They'd been married 38 years, and one day he looked at her and called her by his sister's name. Then he couldn't remember his sister either. By the end, he didn't know who I was. Didn't know who he was. One of the government lawyers stood. "Objection, Your Honor. While we sympathize with Mr. Kovac's loss, early-onset dementia has many causes. There's no direct evidence." "Counselor," Judge Westmore interrupted, her voice cutting. "I've read the EPA study from 1976. I've seen the internal memos. Sit down and let the witness speak." The lawyer sat. Clearwater approached, carrying a folder. "Mr. Kovac, is this your father's medical chart from Millbrook General Hospital?" "Yes." "Can you read the diagnosis dated March 2021, 6 months before his death?" Daniel's hands shook as he read aloud, "Advanced dementia with probable toxic encephalopathy, etiology unknown." "Probable toxic encephalopathy," Clearwater repeated. "The doctors suspected poisoning but couldn't confirm it because they didn't know what to test for. Isn't that correct?" "Yes. Because no one told them. No one told us. My father worked there for 11 years, and no one ever said the water was contaminated. That the air was contaminated. That he was being poisoned every single day." Clearwater pulled out another document. "Is this your father's journal, the one you found in your attic?" "Yes." "Please read the entry dated April 15, 1979. Daniel read his father's words, his voice breaking. "Danny asked me today why my hands shake. I told him I was cold. I'm lying to my son because I don't know the truth myself. But I'm afraid. We're all afraid, those of us in Building C, something's wrong. Something's been wrong for a long time." The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's keys. "Your father suspected something was wrong," Clearwater said. "But he kept working. He had a family to support. A mortgage. He needed the job. And no one in authority ever confirmed his suspicions. No one warned him. They just let him keep drinking that water, breathing that air, until it destroyed his mind." The government's lead attorney stood for cross-examination. His name was Patterson, and he had the kind of face that suggested he'd be good at poker, revealing nothing. "Mr. Kovac, isn't it true that your father smoked for 20 years?" "Yes. And that smoking is a known risk factor for dementia. He quit in 1985. His symptoms started in 2015. But the damage could have been accumulating." "The EPA study predicted exactly what happened to him," Daniel interrupted. "Down to the timeline, the symptoms, everything. You read that study. You know it predicted this." Patterson's expression flickered. "Mr. Kovac, isn't it true that you stand to benefit financially from this lawsuit?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. "My father is dead," Daniel said quietly. "No amount of money brings him back. No settlement returns the last 6 years of his life, when he didn't know who I was. When my daughter visited him and he looked at her like a stranger." His voice rose. "You want to talk about what I stand to gain? I gain the truth. I gain knowing that my father didn't just get unlucky, that his suffering wasn't random, that someone, somewhere, will be held accountable for choosing secrecy over safety. No further questions, Patterson said, returning to his seat. Judge Westmore called a recess. In the hallway, Daniel found Emma waiting with Clearwater's paralegal. She wrapped her arms around his waist. "You were brave, Daddy," she whispered. Through the courthouse windows, Daniel could see the city moving on with its ordinary day, cars passing, people walking, the world continuing as if nothing momentous was happening inside these walls. But something was happening. The sealed files were open now. The silence was broken. The damage was done, yes, but the reckoning had finally begun. Chapter 5, What Remains. The settlement was announced on a gray afternoon in February, nearly 2 years after Daniel had first opened his father's letter. He heard about it not from Clearwater, but from the news, a reporter standing outside the same federal courthouse, explaining to the camera that the government had agreed to a $340 million settlement for the victims of Millbrook's contamination. No admission of wrongdoing, the reporter said. But compensation, medical monitoring, and a promise to declassify all remaining documents. No admission of wrongdoing. Daniel turned off the television and sat in the silence of his father's house, now legally his, the mortgage finally paid off with the first installment of the settlement. The kitchen looked the same as it had that snowy morning when the letter arrived, same scarred table, same view of the yard where Emma no longer drew patterns in frost, being 9 now and more interested in books than windows. His phone rang constantly that evening. Other families from the lawsuit, crying or celebrating or simply exhausted. Janet Morrison called to say her father had died 3 days earlier, too soon to know the fight had meant something. Kevin Petrosky called to say the money didn't matter, that his sister would never be whole, but at least the truth was out. At least that. Clearwater called last. "You should feel proud," the lawyer said. "What you did, what all of you did, you forced them to acknowledge it. That matters." "They didn't admit fault," Daniel said. "No. They never do. But the files are open now. Researchers can study them. Families can understand what happened to their loved ones. That's not nothing, Mr. Kovac." After the call ended, Daniel climbed to the attic. The boxes were still there, though he'd removed most of the documents for the lawsuit. What remained were the personal things, photographs, his father's reading glasses, a pocket watch that had belonged to Daniel's grandfather. Things that had no evidentiary value, only emotional weight. He found the last photograph taken of his father before the dementia had fully taken hold. Victor stood in this very yard, autumn leaves scattered around his feet, smiling slightly at whoever held the camera. His eyes were still clear then, still present. Still holding everything he knew and feared and couldn't speak. Daniel had his own medical monitoring appointment next week. The settlement included comprehensive health screening for all second-generation victims, tracking the poison's legacy as it moved through families, through generations. Emma would be monitored too, for the rest of her life, watching for signs that her grandfather's exposure had reached forward to touch her. The tremor in Daniel's left hand had worsened. The headaches came more frequently. The doctor said it was too early to know if it meant anything, but Daniel had read the studies now. He understood the statistics, the elevated risks, the way TCE could hide in the body for decades before revealing what it had done. He might become his father. Emma might have to watch him forget her name, might have to explain to her own children someday why Grandpa didn't recognize them. The poison's work wasn't finished. It might never be finished. But the silence was broken. Daniel descended from the attic carrying the photograph. In the kitchen, he placed it on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a strawberry that Emma had made in art class. His father's face looked out at the room, frozen in that moment of clarity, and Daniel found himself speaking to the image. "They know now, Dad. Everyone knows what they did to you." Outside, spring was beginning its slow arrival. The flower beds his mother had planted, left barren for so many years, were showing green shoots. Daniel had planted them last fall, tulips and daffodils, flowers that required patience, that slept through winter and returned each year despite everything. Emma had helped, her small hands pressing bulbs into the earth, asking if Grandpa would have liked them. Yes, Daniel had told her. He would have. The next morning, Daniel drove to Millbrook Industrial Park. The facility had been demolished 5 years ago, the contaminated soil excavated and removed, the groundwater treatment ongoing. Where the windowless concrete building had stood, there was now a memorial, a simple granite wall engraved with names. 463 workers. The ones they'd been able to document. The ones whose families had come forward. Victor Kovac's name was in the third row. Daniel traced it with his fingertips, the letters cut deep into stone, permanent now in a way his father's memories never got to be. Other names surrounded Victor's: Morrison, Chen, Petrosky, Santos, all the men who'd smiled in that photograph from 1973, all of them gone now, all of them betrayed by the same carefully maintained silence. Someone had left flowers at the memorial's base. Fresh ones, recently placed. Daniel wasn't the only person who came here, wasn't the only one still carrying the weight of what had been done and what could never be undone. He stayed until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, colors his father would never see again, questions his father would never answer. Had Victor suspected early on? Had he understood what was happening to him as his mind began to slip? Had he been afraid? The journal suggested yes. The journal suggested his father had lived with fear and suspicion for years, had died with the truth locked inside a brain that had been systematically destroyed by the very people who'd promised to protect him. But the journal also existed. His father had written it down. Had preserved the evidence, even if he couldn't speak it. Had left breadcrumbs for Daniel to follow, a trail leading to this moment, the settlement, the declassified files, the memorial wall, the truth finally told. Driving home, Daniel passed the house where he'd grown up, now occupied by a young family with children in the yard. They didn't know what had happened here. Didn't know they were living on ground that had been poisoned, remediated, declared safe. The second-generation exposure risk was lower now, the lawyers had said. The contamination was cleaned up, mostly. Probably. The words felt familiar. The same careful language that had allowed the poisoning in the first place: minimal risk, acceptable levels, nothing to worry about. At home, Emma was waiting, sitting at the kitchen table with her homework spread before her. She looked up when Daniel entered, and he saw his father's eyes looking back at him, the same shade of brown, the same shape. Genetics passing forward, carrying both gifts and curses, both memory and poison. How was the memorial? She asked. Quiet, Daniel said. Peaceful. He sat beside her, helping with fractions, his hand occasionally tremoring as he held the pencil. Emma noticed but said nothing. She'd learned not to mention it, had learned that some things hurt her father to acknowledge. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Daniel pulled out the journal one last time. He'd read it dozens of times now, had memorized certain passages, but tonight he turned to the final entry again. His father's last written words, dated 6 months before the facility closed. Can't remember if I took my medication this morning. Lisa is worried. I'm worried. Something's not right. Something hasn't been right for a long time. But who do you tell? Who would listen? Daniel picked up a pen and, below his father's words, in his own handwriting, he wrote. I listened, Dad. The world listened. The files were sealed, but we opened them. The damage was done, but we named it. You didn't suffer in silence. Not anymore. Not ever again. He closed the journal and placed it on the shelf beside his father's photograph, beside Emma's art projects and the bills that still came and the ordinary debris of continuing life. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The cardinal that had haunted the yard all winter sang once from the fence, its voice carrying across the growing dark. Daniel stood at the window, watching night fall over Millbrook, over the remediated ground, over the memorial wall and the houses and the lives still being lived in the shadow of what had been done. The damage was done. But the silence was broken. And somehow, in the space between those two truths, Daniel found something that might eventually become peace. The cardinals sang again, and Daniel listened.